On 9/11/2001, I sat in an empty English classroom at West Point. And as I watched the events unfold, I started to have a realization that my entire life had just changed. Because rather than spending 5 years as a military intelligence officer in Hawaii, checking security clearances and surfing, I was going to war. And we did. So over the course of my 5 years in the Army, I spent 27 months in combat operations between Afghanistan and Iraq. And for those of you who were in the military or have somebody else that you know in the military, the same question always comes up is, well, did you spend that time outside the wire? Did you see combat? Were you in action? And my experience was probably somewhere in the middle. In my first deployment in Afghanistan, I was with 227 Infantry in a small outpost on the eastern coast of Afghanistan next to Pakistan. We'd get woken up about 3 times a week with boom. The first time I heard it, I was like, wow, it actually makes that sound, like in the movies. After that, it got a little different. But my second deployment was a little different. I was in Iraq, and I was there for 12 months, and I was part of a military transition team, or a MIT team, which means that I was embedded in the Iraqi army as a trainer for them. And so during that deployment, we did about 50 combat missions. You can see I was stuck on the 50 cal for a little while during a couple of them. But we were mostly fortunate. We got blown up a few times with IEDs. I got hit 2 days before coming home with my vehicle, which was actually on our way back to the big base. And so once everybody was okay, it was like, wow, we made it. Like, everybody's okay. And so we were pretty fortunate in that, we saw some things, but I felt like I came back okay. Fast forward 10 years. I'm sitting in Dallas, laying on the ground in a hotel room with a half-empty bottle of Maker's Mark and a 9mm. And I'm trying to decide if that's going to be my last day. It was 50-50. I made the decision that day to go get help instead. I didn't know what I was doing. I went online, I Googled rehabs, and I went to one. Ended up being a great place. But that kicked off a 4-year journey for me, a journey that took me to rehab. It took me to Cambodia, where I lived at a temple and practiced mindfulness for 3 months. And it took me back here to Jacksonville, where I grew up, to start Sophros Recovery, a place where we could help other people who were in the same situation that I was in. People always ask, they say, do you think that your time in the military led to some of the struggles that you had? And for years, my immediate answer was no. No, I don't have PTSD. I didn't get a traumatic brain injury. I'm not struggling with military sexual trauma. So no, I don't think it had anything to do with it. But over the last year, in treating veterans at Sophros, and talking to my friends, and thinking about my own experience, I've kind of come back to I don't know. I don't know if it did or didn't. But I do know that I continue to see certain themes and certain characteristics of veterans who are seeking help. And today I want to kind of talk about what a few of those things are and some modalities that we think are effective in handling those. So these are the 3 the way I've worded them. There are others, and you'll hear later a little bit more about PTSD. We won't cover that in this one. But it's loss of identity, operator syndrome, and this tough it out mentality. So we'll talk about each one of them. There we go. So the military is littered with symbols and uniforms and specific haircuts, and we all look the same. And it's all part of building this shared identity. At West Point freshman year, you have to memorize the definition of leather. If the fresh skin of an animal is cleaned and divested of all hair, fat, and other extraneous matter, it is immersed in a dilute solution of tannic acid, a chemical combination ensues. The gelatinous tissue is transformed into a substance that is impervious to and insoluble in water. Sir, this is leather. My freshman year cadre will be proud that I still remember that. But what that means, if you think about it and you break it down, it's supposed to be an allegory for basic training and for your first year at West Point. And so the whole military kind of goes through this indoctrination where the excess hair on leather, right, you get shorter hair, fat, and other extraneous matter, all of the things from your old life are put away. And you're broken down. And then you're built back up. And the process is that way intentionally, but when you're built back up as part of a greater whole, as part of a team. And that is an amazing thing while you're in the military. The challenge becomes, once you get out, you no longer know who you are. I've got the Army values as well: loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, personal courage. Did I get that right? Yeah, I did. Still remember that one too. But each one of the branches of service has these values, so it goes beyond just outward appearance and symbols and uniforms, but it goes all the way to our core values that we live by. And these values are no longer ours, but they're the values of the team. And they're amazing values. They're wonderful. I still live by a lot of these, or I hope to. But again, once we're out of the military, it's a quote I came up with last night or a couple nights ago. It says, while a shared identity is a highly powerful tool to form a cohesive unit and enhance camaraderie, that same shared identity becomes a liability when we must later integrate into society as an individual. And I think if you talk to anyone who was in the military, I would say 98, 99% of people struggle with this to some degree. What do I do now? Who am I now? I know who I was. And I didn't like, the whole time I complained. For 5 years, I complained about how it was too hot, it was raining, bad guys were trying to kill me, I'm tired. And then as soon as I leave, I'm like, wait, but that was who I was. That was what I was. So what am I now? So how we start to combat this with both our civilian and our military clients, veteran clients, is we start to do an exploration of self. We need to go back to the drawing board and figure out what values are important to us. Which ones resonate? What is my core self? Who am I and what do I stand for? And you see the vision board there. Like, let's make a picture of it. Let's figure out who we are. Then we can start to move forward. I put a couple of the logos on here, one for Psych Armor and one for Team RWB. And this is part of the challenge, I think. When it comes to veteran treatment, there are two schools of thought. On one hand, you have veteran-specific training. On the other hand, you have integrated training. The real answer, I think, lies somewhere in the middle. When we have integrated training, it's important to educate our team and our staff on the language that's used so that we're using the same shared language. On the veteran experience, what are common things? What is the worldview that a lot of veterans share? Because veterans need to feel safe and they need to feel seen. And that's easy to do in an all-veteran environment because they know each other and they're like, it's very easy. Everyone speaks the same language. The challenge there is now we're not working on this problem of like, how do we start to reintegrate as an individual? And so I think some of both can be very useful. And Team RWB is just an organization that helps veterans reintegrate through fitness and camaraderie. So stuff like that I think is helpful, but it's also good. We've got to start working on this, like how do we integrate successfully? Next, we're going to talk about operator syndrome. So this isn't in the DSM-5 as a diagnosed condition, but it's something that has been starting to be identified by researchers as kind of a unique constellation of physical and mental health characteristics that are shared initially by operators. And by operators, I mean special forces operators. But it goes beyond that. And so the definition here is that operator syndrome may be understood as the natural consequences of an extraordinarily, you know what I mean, high allostatic load, the accumulation of physiological, neural, and neuroendocrine responses resulting from the prolonged chronic stress. What does that mean? It means we were turned up for too long. We existed in a state of hypervigilance for 15 months at a time. Like the lion was always there, and you didn't know where. A combat patrol is anytime you drive in Iraq, because you don't know if you're going to hit an ID. And so every piece of trash on the side of the road, every fresh patch of dirt, every corner, every adult male that walks towards you, and every child is a threat. And so you have to be turned up. You have to be ready for anything. Your mind has to be full of a million different things that could possibly happen so that you're ready to react on the spot. That's a state you have to be in for war. It doesn't serve us well here. You guys ever seen a veteran sit in a restaurant and have his back to the wall? Know where the exits are? We've all done it. The lion's probably not right there anymore. But we've got to figure out how to come back. So we've got a combination of different modalities that I think are effective in starting to return someone back to a normal state after a prolonged state of hypervigilance. And the first one is mindfulness. Like I said, I spent some time in Cambodia practicing mindfulness. It's a big part of my own personal practice. But mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment on purpose, in a particular way, non-judgmentally. There are other definitions, but that's the one I like. And so what we learn to do is we learn to focus on, in many cases, the object of meditation, which may be your breath. It may be your body. It may be what you hear, but you're focused on one thing. Now contrast that with what we talked about before, where you're trying to focus on everything because you don't know what's going to happen. And so we're trying to train the mind to be able to focus, to be able to calm down, and to be able to kind of sit in quiet for a little bit and take some of that stress off of your nervous system. The second part is dialectical behavior therapy. And I don't know if you guys can see the little flower here, but it's made up of mindfulness, emotion regulation, distress tolerance, and interpersonal effectiveness skills. And there's a whole DBT curriculum, but specifically, I like the DBT core skills. And when I talk to veteran clients, what I talk to them about is that these are your battle drills. And so a battle drill, for those of you who are not familiar, a battle drill is when things hit the fan. When the enemy starts shooting at you, you do this. There's a thing you do. Battle drill 1 alpha, go. Right? And it's a set of things, and it's immediate, and it's a reaction, and it doesn't require you to think about it. Right? And the reason you have these battle drills is because it's really hard to think through problems when the world's on fire. And so you need some battle drills. So let's teach them some battle drills. Right? The stop skill from DBT, stop. Take a step back. Observe the situation and proceed mindfully. It's short, it's fast, but sometimes it can take us out of that moment for just long enough so that we realize the house isn't on fire. TIP is another one that's been proven to work with veterans struggling with PTSD, which is temperature regulation. So you cool off your wrists or you jump in a cold shower. Intense exercise. So 60 seconds, 2 minutes, 3 minutes of all-out exercise as fast as you can go. Progressive muscle relaxation. So you flex a muscle as tight as you can and then you release it all the way up your body one at a time. And then paced breathing to just bring it full circle and slow everything down. So we start to teach these battle drills so that when the house is on fire, you know that there's some stuff you can do immediately. And then you have stuff like relapse prevention plans, call lists to layer onto that as additional resources. And finally, we have CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. So how do we take unhealthy thoughts and reframe them into healthy ones. How do we do that? Well, that's hard when the house is on fire, so we need some skills from DBT, right? But when the house isn't on fire, we're training this. We're training this every day. We're practicing it. We're doing thought records. We're staying in this moment of, hey, ABC analysis. Like, let me evaluate this unhealthy thought. Let me check it against reality, and let me reframe myself. And so any one of these are evidence-based, and they're great modalities. I think where we start to see some additional benefits is when we start to combine these separate modalities into a toolkit that the veteran can have for kind of whatever situation they might be in. Finally, this tough it out mentality. You know, in the Army, if you're on a run and you're in formation, you know, you're 64 troopers on a one-way trip, and you sprain your ankle. Mission top secret, you run it out. You do not stop running. Your ankle can fall off, and you will still be in that formation, and you will not fall behind. And that very skill allows people in combat to do some things that are superhuman, going above and beyond the limits of our body and our mind to do these things that are extraordinary and heroic. That's the good part. The bad part is that toughing it out doesn't work with mental health. It doesn't work with substance use disorder. We have to address it. We have to treat it. We're not tougher than it. It's not about being tough. It's about there's a problem, and we need to address it. And I think this is the biggest reason why a lot of veterans don't get help. So we have to redefine what vulnerability and strength mean. I always use the analogy of, if you're talking to a veteran and you said, if you were facing an enemy in combat, would you run away? Any vet in the room would be like, no, absolutely not. Like, I'm going down with this ship. Well, right now, your enemy is your anxiety. It's your depression. It's alcohol. It's drugs. So why are we running away? The only way out is through. And so we need to face this enemy head on, just like we would an enemy in combat. I've lost more friends to suicide and substance use disorder in the last 20 years than I have to IEDs and enemy fire. I don't like that. And I think the solution starts with rooms like this, where all of you have taken the time to invest your time and your day to learn how we can improve our craft to better treat veterans and to have more successful clinical outcomes so that they can get well. So that's all I got. What questions do you have?